Welcome back to Tales of Knights and Magic. Subscribe if you like, and now get comfortable, and enjoy this glimpse into the world of fantasy. Carthian didn't remember what his mother looked like, but he remembered the color of the cellar he was born in. Brown clay, yellow mildew, black corners. He remembered the way rats would shrink away from light, the way men passed coins like knives, and used names like death. In places like that, you learned what mattered by what got people killed. And nothing got people killed faster than knowing something they weren't supposed to. That idea stayed with him longer than any name or injury. He started reading before he could fight, learned symbols, then maps, then languages long abandoned. When other boys were lifting blades or betting on rats, Carthian was listening to a dying drunk in an alley raving about symbols drawn in bone that could command fire without heat. The man died mid-sentence. Carthian kept listening anyway. Years later, he found pieces of what that drunk had been trying to describe, and from that point forward there was no return. They weren't spells, they weren't shaped by emotion or channeled through incantation. They weren't like the flashy cantrips passed between merchant mages, or the careful rituals used by circle-bound high casters. These were runes, ancient, dangerous, precise. Every line had to be drawn perfectly, every edge carved. Not painted. They weren't cast, they were written, and the world listened to them differently, more like commandments than requests. He saw one in a fragment of an iron plate while cleaning bones in a plague vault. Another was carved into the wall of a deep cistern beneath the far hills, so old the stone had warped around it like it was trying to forget. They didn't glow. They didn't shimmer, they just remained. He didn't speak of them, not once, not even to the few people he let near him. Not because he feared theft, but because the knowledge didn't belong to anyone else. Carthian was a thug by trade, a scholar by obsession, and something else entirely in the making. He didn't work for crew. He took jobs for coin, bodyguard work, cargo smuggling, deep pit recoveries, and used them all as covers for his real pursuit. Most of the men who hired him called him Current. Shorter, easier, something you could mutter in the dark or scream across a room. That suited him. He didn't want a legend yet. He wanted freedom to move. The noble cities were built on networks of loyalty and debt. Underground crime ran on the same rules, just with dirtier hands. Carthian didn't want loyalty, he didn't want crew. He wanted to stand in a place no one else understood, and rewrite the laws beneath their feet. The turning point came in the foothills north of the Tarn Cliffs, 6 years after he took his first rune from a crypt. He'd spent months tracking a dead language through coded merchant logs, following the trail of an expedition that had vanished a century ago. They'd been searching for a dungeon, not in the way treasure hunters did, but in the old way marked by gravity shifts and black stone seams, places where the land remembered too much. When he found the place, it wasn't protected by beasts or guards. The entrance was hidden under a dead stream bed. The only thing that kept people out was the silence. A silence thick enough to hum. Inside, the walls were blank. No carvings, no warnings, just slabs of stone holding back pressure. There were 4 levels, 2 had collapsed, the third held nothing but the remains of old armor. The 4th had the circle. It wasn't large, no bigger than a small table. Etched into the center of a flat basin, the rune looked like a spiral broken into 4 parts. He spent 6 hours sketching it, another 12 measuring every line. He didn't touch it. That came later. When he did return, he brought bone chalk, void ink, and a curved knife. The ritual wasn't one he found in any book. It was guessed, pieced together from fragments, designed by logic, not tradition. When he carved the rune into the back of his hand, he felt nothing at first, just a faint throb under the skin, like a muscle he didn't remember pulling. The pain came later. It burned from wrist to elbow, not hot but deep, like something rewiring. For days after, he couldn't move the hand without flinching. But when the ache faded, his grip returned strong, more than strength. It was precision. He could catch things faster, strike harder, react before instinct. The rune had done more than enhance him, it had made him exact. That was the first. He didn't celebrate, he didn't speak to anyone about it. He simply began preparing for the sect. The runes weren't a source of power, they were a structure. He began mapping them, not as weapons, but as tools. One affected memory, another affected breath, another bent shape. He found one in a shattered temple deep in Beastland territory, carved beneath the bones of a wyvern. He fought 5 scavengers for it, killed 2. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted it remembered that this kind of knowledge had a price. His body began to change slowly. Muscles pulled tighter, scars faded, not completely, just enough to slow aging, to feel like time had taken a step back. He didn't need to become immortal. He needed to stay sharp long enough to rise. The runes fed that need without question. He kept moving, drifting from one ruined outpost to the next, avoiding cities except to restock or trade rumors. He didn't lay root, not yet. Cities were for men who needed protection, who built empires with hands they didn't control. Carthian didn't want a throne given or stolen. He wanted one built beneath the old world, not above the law. Before it, the last place he visited before turning toward civilization was a silent chamber carved into a hill shaped like a wound. The runes there were twisted, wrong, marked by failed hands. Whoever had tried to learn them had died choking on their own thought. He walked over their bones and copied what was left. On the way back, he passed through a camp of sellswords and slavers. One of them called him old. He broke that man's arm in 5 places, and left him staring into the fire with tears in his eyes and silence in his throat. Not out of anger, just to remind himself what weakness felt like from the outside. He was almost ready. There was one more rune to inscribe. One more fragment to anchor the base of what would come next. A rune of direction, of purpose. When he carved it behind his right eye, he passed out for 2 days. When he woke, he saw lines, not illusions. Paths, possibilities. Weaknesses in the way people stood. Cracks in walls hidden under paint, imbalances in speech. The world unfolded differently. It wasn't beautiful, it was right. That was when he turned toward the cities, toward names, gold, politics, crime. He didn't want to survive them, he wanted to rewrite them, but not all at once. That would come later. It had to begin somewhere simple, somewhere weak, somewhere he could dig deep enough to hollow out the power from the inside. Bastis, a noble city too stupid to see its own decay. He would walk into it a nobody, and when he left, he would own its memory. The first time Carthian saw Bastis again, he didn't enter through the southern gates like most travelers. He came from the cliffside, descending narrow trails carved by smugglers and beast trackers, the kind of footpaths left off city maps and sealed in official ledgers under the vague phrase "no safe passage." He didn't want safe, he wanted silent. He moved alone, hood low, boots wrapped to muffle his steps, breathing in the old rot of limestone and sea wind. Bastis sat like a cracked jewel on the edge of the kingdom's western curve, half facing the sea and half facing its own reflection. It had once been a trade nexus, fattened by coastal exchange and inland grain. Then the roads moved. The gold left. What remained was corruption, deeply rooted and left to fester under the weight of ritual and bureaucracy. The ruling noble family, House Marrow, still clung to ceremony, but ceremony didn't pay debt. Mercenaries did. Carthian knew their names before he reached the wall. He entered through a drainage chute at dawn, crawling through 600 feet of moss-slick stone, until he emerged in the ruined undercourts of a fallen bathhouse. The moment he stood, the air told him everything. The flux was off here. Not dead, just lazy. It rolled low, heavy in the corners of alleys, thin near the spires, bleeding unpredictably from the vents of alchemist shops and mid-tier charm vendors. That meant weak regulation. Weak regulation meant untied licenses, and untied licenses meant influence could be bought in bulk. He stepped into the first main road, just as the market bells rang. The city woke like a limping drunk. Uneven, too loud in the wrong places, too quiet where there should be motion. Carthian watched. He memorized the scent of oil-wrapped coin, counted the guards, read the badges, logged every stall that bore a crest too old to matter. He didn't look like a threat. He wore dust-caked leathers, a traveler's sash, no weapons visible. The only thing that stood out was the way his eyes tracked movement, fast, deliberate, cataloging. He moved like someone who already understood how the city worked, and was just confirming the pieces. The first building he entered was a rundown tailor's stall near the old Eastern statue row. He asked no questions, just looked at the thread count, the quality of the runes etched into the sleeve linings, noted which pieces were imported and which ones faked the imports. When the shopkeeper asked what he was looking for, he said one word: information. Then he left before the man could ask another question. That was part of it. The seed. Be seen, be remembered for something incomplete. People remembered riddles more than answers. He spent the first 2 days moving like smoke, never fully visible, never fully absent. He walked noble avenues and gutter-side drainage tunnels, watched monster baiters train in the illegal yards behind the stonemasons' guild. He saw 3 men die for spilling the wrong name at the wrong table. Saw one merchant bribe a city warden with a smile and a note folded in 3 corners. He didn't interfere, not yet. He just recorded. Carthian stayed in a 2-room loft above a burned-out bakery near the scent works. He didn't rent it. He didn't kill for it. He simply picked the lock and left a gold ring and 2 dried shrike eyes under the floorboard as payment. The owner would find them. That was part of the system too. Quiet understanding. In cities like this, Words got you stabbed. Symbols got you respected. He spent nights reading, not books, patterns, move. He walked streets with his senses open, the runes behind his eye burning faintly whenever deception passed too close. He tracked which noble runners used which alleys, logged when the enforcers stopped checking manifests, traced the routes of 5 different smugglers. By the 5th night, he had already begun drawing the first circle, not in chalk, in behavior. The first circle had nothing to do with magic. It was a map of momentum. 5 names formed the outer ring, names with control over critical inefficiencies. A man who bribed to import city grain cheap, a smuggler who used old war tunnels under the wall, a minor priest who blessed every black market dagger, a hedge witch with a lock on backstreet medicine, and a former pit champion who now trained crew enforcers in secret. Carthian didn't contact them. He didn't need their cooperation. He needed their patterns. Their existence proved the cracks. He visited the cathedral district in silence. That was where the flux lines met, where the runes beneath the city were stitched together and repressed with passive wards. Old architecture, sloppy, decorative rather than functional. He studied the 3 anchor points and found the fractures immediately. One was already leaking. He sat near it for 6 hours without moving and watched rats pass through a broken seal and vanish. When he stood, he whispered a phrase, 7 syllables, old tongue, dead dialect. The rune behind his eye hummed once, and the crack widened. The city was already breaking. All he had to do was press the right spot. It came on the 7th night. A riot, not large, not plain. It began as a payment dispute in a grinder's yard, when a noble's second son refused to pay for a black-scaled reaver skin he'd commissioned. The workers protested. The son panicked. His bodyguard struck a foreman in the throat with a flux-carved club. That was the spark. Carthian watched from a roof 3 streets away. He saw the spill before it happened. The anger didn't concern him. The timing did. He visited a message runner that same night, a girl who worked from a temple cellar in the Lantern Quarter. He gave her one name, a time and a phrase. He paid in flesh, his own, a single fingernail, laced with marrow blood, still humming from a low rune. She didn't ask why. She delivered it to the smuggler 3 names deep in the outer ring. The next morning, flux shipment logs from the northwest gate vanished. 4 guards reassigned, 3 merchants promoted, 2 disappeared. The system didn't collapse. It shifted, and when it shifted, Carthian stepped into the gap. He walked into a bar he had never entered before, asked the owner where to find a man named Lark. And when the owner asked why, he answered, because you don't want to owe the wrong people by saying no. Lark arrived an hour later, sat down and said nothing. Carthian handed him a folded slip of parchment. It had no writing, just a spiral cut into the paper. Lark paled, nodded and left. Avin was the second, a mage breaker, used to serve under the old city watch before they privatized it. Now he worked freelance. Carthian found him behind a card house in the Gutterfront district. Drunk, bored, dying, he poured water on him, handed him a scrap of beast skin etched with a single rune, and said, "You want to matter again?" Avin followed him the same night. No titles, no banners, no name. Carthian didn't declare a crew. He didn't raise flags. He pulled in men and women one by one, not for loyalty but for use. He didn't offer protection. He offered purpose. You wanted revenge, he gave it. You wanted money, he made it appear. You wanted power, he taught you how to smell it. The inner circle began forming. Quiet, hidden. 1 rune carved into the top of a crate. 1 symbol burned beneath the stone near a dead sister. He didn't mark his presence where the city could see it. He marked it in the moments between coin and blood, where only those who mattered would feel it. The noble who ran the district, Lord Solon, never noticed. Not when his staff began buying from different sources. Not when 3 of his watchmen switched sides. Not even when the licenses in his quarter stopped matching the ones processed by his ledger masters. He was a petty noble, too comfortable, too confident. He would be the first to fall. But Carthian wasn't rushing. He didn't strike yet. He let the city keep breathing, let the pieces settle, let the shadows get used to his shape. He walked the same streets each night, coat flaring just enough, boots never quite loud enough, eyes too calm for a man who should be unknown. People started noticing, not by name, not by face, just presence. That was the point. He didn't need to be famous. He needed to be believed in by the people who could never speak his name. When he returned to his loft at night, a message waited under the door. 3 words written in red wax. "We see you," he smiled. Good. That meant they were almost ready to be broken. The red wax didn't unsettle Carthian. It confirmed what he'd expected. That his presence had reached the right circles. Or rather, that he had allowed it to. He let the message burn over the flame of a lamp, until only the smell of boiled resin remained. The people who sent it didn't need acknowledgement. They didn't send warning, they sent tests. The wax was soft, not fresh, likely folded and kept for weeks, waiting for a reason to use it. That meant observation. That meant the city's shadow structure had eyes on him since at least his first move. He hadn't struck too soon. He'd struck just slow enough to make them curious. Carthian adjusted the folds of his coat, retied the wraps around his boots, and left without a word. He didn't return to the bar, or the market routes, or the places his face had already been seen. Instead, he moved into the old cracks. The real ones. The narrow folds between power where nobody bothered looking because they didn't believe anything real happened there. He walked through the sand-choked ruin district west of the wall, past collapsed buildings left unrepaired for years because the nobles had lost all economic reason to restore them. No guards patrolled here. The people did their own policing, usually with clubs and knives, occasionally with spells no one admitted to knowing. These weren't peasants or thieves. They were remnants, cast-offs, men and women who had stopped participating in the city's illusions and built their own law underneath. This was where Carthian needed to recruit his next two layers. He began with a question. 3 words passed in whispers, spread without signature. What rules you? It appeared scratched into stone, chalked onto walls, whispered at tables. No threats, no promises. Just the question. Some ignored it. Others laughed. A few painted over it. But more than a few started thinking. In Bastis, asking who ruled you wasn't the same as asking who held power. You could name the Duke, or the trade lords, or the faith consortiums. But that wasn't who really moved coin. Closed doors made threats vanish. What ruled you wasn't a name. It was pressure. And for the first time in a long time, pressure had changed direction. A man named Hartil found him first. Bald, branded across both forearms with symbols of debt and servitude. A former enforcer for a half-dead crew that had once held half of Dockwatch. Hartil didn't come to beg. He came to offer. Said he'd been watching for days. Said he didn't care what Carthian wanted. Only that, whatever it was, it made people shift. Carthian listened, nodded, handed him a sealed parchment with a crude rune on the front, and told him, "You don't work for me. You work instead of me." Hartil didn't ask for clarification. He left smiling. Then came Vishu. Half-elf, scar across her cheek. Eyes that moved too quickly to belong to a drunk, but she played one convincing. She'd been tailing Carthian for nearly a week, and finally confronted him on the edge of a flux-drained prayer house, whispering, "If I wanted you dead, I'd have done it 6 days ago. That means I'm waiting for something better." He told her she was hired. She asked what the job was. He told her to find 3 things: a name, a vault, and a sigil. When she asked which, he told her she'd know when she had the right ones. She left muttering that cryptics made her stomach turn. With Hartil and Vishu in motion, Carthian returned to the spine of his effort, mapping the noble web around Lord Solon. He already knew Solon was weak. Now he wanted to know how weak. He used ledger copies, hired message runners, bribed 3 teenage cart pullers to follow servants to and from the estate. He cross-referenced food shipments with guard rotations, found a pattern. Every 3rd day, 3 wagons left the estate marked as supply trains for the outer granary. But one of those wagons passed through 2 checkpoints and never entered the granary at all. It stopped at a nondescript house near the archive quarter, dropped 3 boxes, and left. The house wasn't on city record. No sigil, no owner listed, but a new lantern was placed outside the front door every week. The wick was charmed, expensive, not flashy, meant to keep attention away. He sent Vesha to watch. 2 days later, she reported, "The place is a clearinghouse for bribes. Not money, favors." Nobles owed things they couldn't pay publicly. Pacts, silences, disappearances, arranged transports. It all went through that house. Run by a minor archivist named Munral Dust. No title, no blade, just 1,000 secrets and an unlocked door. Carthian watched him once, just once, from a rooftop while the man ate lunch from a box and corrected documents. He didn't look dangerous. That was the point. He didn't need to. He held paper. Paper held history, and history ruled cities better than swords. He didn't kill Dust. He killed Dust's replacement. A woman named Renelle was being groomed to take over. She'd been trained for 8 years, paid well, and trusted with minor favors to earn clout. Carthian slit her throat in an alley with no witnesses and left no mark except a spiral drawn in water on the wall beside her corpse. When the body was found, the nobles panicked. That was the move, not the death, the doubt. Dast locked his house for the first time in 5 years. The supply wagon rerouted. Solon pulled his advisors for a closed meeting. Carthian didn't need to hear it. He knew the pen. Carthian tipped one of Solon's storehouses 2 days later. Not a raid, a theft. Quiet. Precise. No casualties. 3 items taken. A sealed ledger, a crate of silver point charms, and a false identity scroll. Carthian burned the ledger, kept the charms, handed the scroll to Vash. She used it to walk into the Hall of Terrace and forge a series of quota changes that resulted in 5 key merchants pulling out of Solon's district. The noble didn't know who to punish. That was by design. The first spiral appeared on a guardhouse the next morning, drawn in soot. No explanation. 2 days later, another spiral. On a dead dog left at the noble's stables. Then one on the side of a merchant's cart. Then one carved into the side of the tax collector's desk. No slogans, no demands, just spirals. People started whispering, not loudly, but enough that Solon's men were pulled tighter. Enough that flux prices rose. Enough that bribes stopped working. Carthian moved to his second loft. Different part of the city, above a slaughterhouse. No one found him. He didn't need to speak anymore. He had symbols. The spiral had become a presence. Not seen, felt, not worshipped, feared. That was better. He began carving the next rune into his spine that night. No blade, just pressure. A metal thread dipped in cursed wax and ash from an ancient flame. It etched without bleeding, and when it was done, he slept for 12 hours. When he woke, he smelled power like most men smelled food. He dressed, stretched, and whispered the phrase that would become the first law of his new empire. Ruin doesn't scream, it whispers until you live in it. And then he left to meet his next city. The second city was called Velmor, a walled expanse built on top of what had once been a dwarven mining capital, long abandoned when the veins went dry. The nobles who claimed it centuries later filled the caverns with vaults, estates, and deep-level housing for servants too important to kill and too dangerous to trust. Surface Velmor was political, polished, draped in ceremonial robes and decrees that changed with the wind. But underneath, in the bones of the city, everything ran on secrets and coin. Carthian arrived not with banners or bodyguards but on foot, alone, 3 weeks after setting Bestus into motion. He didn't flee Bestus, he left it pulsing. The spiral was still moving there, etched into memory, gaining weight. He had no need to hold it physically. What mattered was that the city couldn't forget him, and couldn't name him. Velmor didn't scare easily. It was older, cleaner, better defended, with a political structure so layered even the lowliest merchant had 4 ties to 4 different factions. But Carthian didn't want their trust. He wanted their cracks. The first 3 days he spent eating in silence in the market near the inner ring. He watched traders barter over scribed salt, saw clerics selling blessed smoke, and logged 5 different coin markings, each subtly different, indicating which merchant houses backed them. Coins told stories. He followed them. He rented a room in a shared lodge run by a mute orc, whose left tusk was banded with prayer beads. He paid in trade 1 silver point charm, 3 sealed papers forged in Bestus, and an old map of Velmor's sewer structure, annotated with real physical chalk. The orc said nothing, but Carthian noticed the beads were rotated the next morning. A signal, a thank you, an understanding. On day 4 he passed the palace district. Not into it, around it. The guards didn't wear noble livery. They wore velvet black coats, enchanted with silence glyphs stitched into the cuffs. Former death dealers, court-hired killers. They didn't blink when someone passed. They studied eyes. Velmor's nobles didn't bother with thugs. They hired men who didn't flinch at memory. He left a spiral at the base of the palace wall that night. Not visible, not obvious. It was etched behind a drain plate that only overflowed once a month. He left it not as a message but as a placeholder. A claim. Something the stone would remember even if no eyes did. The next step was economy. He tracked the salt routes. Velmor's most lucrative undertrade. Not just for flavor but spellbinding. Salt took enchantments better than any other mundane component, and the 3 major noble houses controlled its flow. He found the lowest ranked handler in House Teneville, a woman named Sara who logged manifest and managed pack teams. He didn't threaten her. He didn't bribe her. He left a wax-sealed scroll on her desk at dusk, with nothing written inside except a rune she couldn't understand and a drawing of a dead tree with 1 branch blooming. She tried to report it. Her superior told her to forget it. Too risky to provoke a new faction. That was Carthian's signal. The fear was already stronger than the facts. He followed that with a theft, not for gain, for signature. 1 crate of enchanted chain links, taken from a mid-tier enchanter's delivery queue. It went missing for 2 days, then returned with a spiral burned into the lid. Nothing inside was stolen, nothing broken, but now it was touched. Merchants stopped bidding on those crates. Carthian listened, waited. When the names started to swirl, the Spiral faction, the Rune Syndicate, the Wordless Ones, he knew it was time to grow. Fellmore didn't need destruction. It needed a fracture, a single lie to root into truth. So he created one. He forged a false noble, using 5 old documents, a blood-marked signet ring stolen from Bastis, and a sewn-together history backed by 3 disposable assets. Carthian became Veal of Udrin, a minor house scion come to Velmore to establish foreign contracts. The name meant nothing. The papers were airtight, and nobles, for all their suspicion, believed what could be proven on parchment. He walked into the estate registration hall, dressed in charcoal robes, bearing the sigil of a dead bird nested in a wheel, and claimed a guest manor on the outer ring. 3 hours later, he was listed in the ledger. 2 days after that, he was invited to a minor feast. He didn't attend, he sent an assistant, a mute masked figure who passed messages and folded glyphs. There were no answers to his glyphs. That wasn't the point. The point was that people began speaking about him, debating his intent, his lineage, his resources. While they speculated, Carthian met with the outcasts. Velmore's structure wasn't just built on nobles, it leaned on debt. Below every estate were the writless, those who'd lost their papers through crime or politics. Men and women who still lived here but weren't allowed to own, vote or speak in court. The writless had no voice, but they had weight. They moved the underground, they worked the forbidden room. They served in every illegal experiment, every flux cage, every soul skin binding that the nobles denied existed. He spoke to them, not all, just 5. Each one a carrier of old hate. Each one still remembered by name in the court records as untrustworthy. He told them only this: I don't want you to obey me, I want you to follow a shape. Then he showed them the spiral. 2 walked away, 1 returned, the other 2 joined without a word. They brought others. The writless didn't march, they didn't protest. They were, and Carthian gave them tasks that looked like work. Moving boxes, altering ledgers, shifting floor stones in unused storage areas. It took 10 days to build the first signal net. Small glass plates, etched with overlapping rune patterns, placed into doorframes across the noble district. They didn't cast spells. They recorded energy. If a flux pattern changed, the plate remembered it. If someone passed through a glyph without permission, it logged the echo. Information poured in, and from it, Carthian built the next spiral. This one wasn't drawn. It was lit. He set 3 messages in motion. A letter suggesting House Vendrell planned to defect from the Noble Council. A ledger hinting House Teneville had bribed a church mage. A sealed confession forged from a dying flux runner, implicating House Marrow in a failed assassination from a decade ago. None of them were true. All of them were believable. Within a week, 2 houses began watching each other instead of their districts. Carthian walked between them unnoticed. He etched another spiral, this one into the air. A resonance pattern sung in low frequency through the noble hall vent. The melody meant nothing to untrained ears, but to those who had heard its shape before, it whispered recognition. People began calling him the voice. He never corrected them. 3 enchanters defected from House Teneville without explanation. 1 estate went dark for 3 nights. The salt market dipped. Panic bloomed quietly, like mold in the corners of an untouched room. And beneath it all, the writless whispered. They didn't say Carthian's name, they said, he's building the words. That was enough. In the basement of his guest manor, lit by nothing but the soft burn of memory wax, Carthian drew the newest rune, not on his body, on the city itself. He painted it across a map made from ash paper and stitched thread, each point marked with a drop of water taken from the 3 main wells. The runes spread like ink, and the spiral in Bastis pulsed once in answer. Carthian smiled. 1 city was fear, 2 was proof. Next came reach. Carthian stood alone in the center of the ruined cistern, beneath the city's merchant quarter, staring at a pool of water so black it reflected nothing. The map in his mind no longer relied on roads or names. He navigated by stress points, pressure veins in the structure of Velmore's economy, politics, belief. Everything had a crack, if you knew how to measure it, and the runes made him better at measuring than any sage or spy the nobles had ever paid for. He didn't speak as he worked, only moved. 1 step at a time, planting the 3rd stage glyphs into the broken channels that had once powered the dwarven sluices. The runes were carved not for activation but resonance. They didn't cast spells, they adjusted the shape of the space around them, teaching the world to misremember its limits. Each one etched deeper into the foundation of his growing empire. No armies, no flags, just pressure applied until the stone shifted to match the spiral in his head. Above, Velmore continued to function as if nothing was wrong. Nobles met in halls lined with gold-leafed scripture, reciting oaths passed down from ancestors who'd never needed to live by them. The merchant rings traded false coin for real favor. Church scholars made public predictions about flux weather, while private initiates performed illegal soulbinds beneath their sanctuaries. Every corner of the surface operated under the illusion of certainty, and Carthian moved through it like fog. He didn't need to hide from guard. He let them see what they expected: a scribe, a traveler, a man too quiet to be important. But in every shadow he passed, a signal was left behind. Runes too subtle to trigger attention, but placed precisely where they would endure, drawing the city's shape one line at a time into something he could command. The Ritless grew. He never organized them. He fed them patterns. He taught 3 of them how to write the spiral into furniture, how to encode intention into seating arrangements and hand movements. He tested reactions in markets by shifting prices a single tick and observing how quickly people adjusted their tone. He learned the pulse of power in Velmore wasn't held by force. It was held by rhythm. Everything ran on habit, on assumption, on predictability. So he changed tempo. The salt deliveries were delayed by 15 minutes for 2 weeks. Just enough to make record keepers suspicious. Then they were early, then exact again. By the end of the 3rd week, no one trusted the record. They started checking manually. That created gaps. He moved through those gaps like a whisper. Volovidren remained a name spoken in careful tones among the lower estates. His sealed letters were never answered, but they were always read. He sent impossible proposals to middle-tier merchants, offering absurdly favorable rates for contracts that didn't exist. He gave too much. That made them curious. Curiosity became attention. Attention became belief. He only had to follow the every city was a body, and Velmore's nerves were overfed and undertrained. The moment it flinched, he knew where to stab. He marked 3 locations for collapse: the Spice Archivist's Ledger Vault, the East Bridge Merchant Gate, and the private prayer room beneath the Hall of Nine. He did not destroy them. He shifted their meaning. The Ledger Vault was reclassified through forged documents and an altered lock charm. The gate had its toll scripts adjusted by 2 copper. The prayer room was blessed with a rune that didn't shine but made the walls echo slightly longer than normal. Small changes, forgotten within hours, but each change taught him how the structure handled interference. Each change rewrote a sentence in the city's subconscious. Hartel and Vesha returned with new faces. Hartel had started training 2 groups of fighters, not for combat but for silence. He taught them to watch without reaction, to record movement without writing. Vesha had gone deeper. She came back with a child, mute, carrying a locked box that pulsed with low-runed heat. When Carthian opened it, he found a crest ring belonging to House Tarn. Stolen, maybe, lost, possibly, but real, valuable, dangerous. He placed it in a sealed case and buried it beneath a stone floor marked with the rune of recursion. If anyone ever found it, they would be forced to remember him first. The enchanters in the upper district began feeling it, not pain, not presence, but dissonance. Their wards frayed too easily. Their projections lost clarity. They started whispering about shifts in the city's base resonance. Carthian had done nothing directly. He had only instructed 3 Ritless laborers to rearrange the courtyard tiles outside 3 workshops. The pattern matched an ancient flow-dampening glyph that had no known caster logic. It wasn't supposed to function anymore, and yet it did. He was being watched, not by nobles, by things older. Runes left echoes. Echoes attracted attention. He dreamed of symbols turning in sand. He tasted metal and water drawn from stone fountains. The city had begun to answer. That didn't frighten him. It proved that it could hear. The next spiral was etched into the vault key of a noble caravan 3 days before it was ambushed by unknown raiders. Carthian didn't order the attack, but someone had watched the spiral move and reacted. That was important. That meant replication had begun. The idea was spreading beyond his hand. Others were drawing the shape. Others were adapting it. He responded not with escalation but with calm. He began writing letters again, not to houses but to merchants, lesser priests, exiled casters. He wrote not with threats, not with demands, but with questions, always the same. What would you trade for silence? The responses varied. Some offered coin, some begged for protection, some vanished. He recorded each one, marked each door, and assigned a color to each reply. Red for cowardice, blue for control, black for potential. He added none to his circle. He allowed them to think he was choosing. The truth was, he'd already chosen. They just hadn't caught up yet. He began aging backward again, not visibly, internally. The rune beneath his spine itched as his bones settled into smoother rotations, as his joints stopped aching. He moved with the rhythm of a man half his age, and thought like someone twice it. He dreamed in pattern. He began hearing his own thoughts echo back in the cadence of the spiral. Not madness, Synchronization. The runes were not just tools anymore. They were perspective. He visited Vastus through a proxy, an old contact who moved without name or face, delivering messages through the placement of stones on a river wall. Vastus had not collapsed. It had coalesced. The spiral had taken form not in banners or declarations, but in expectation. People there were acting different. They hesitated before lying. They watched shadows longer. The noble who replaced Solon had hired 6 bodyguards and spoke in whispers. No one knew who had taken control. Everyone obeyed what they thought it wanted. That was Victor. He wrote 3 new runes, each one encoded into the ceilings of abandoned vaults beneath Belmore's merchant quarter. These weren't instructions. They were questions. He left them in place to be read by the city itself. Each one carried intent, not meaning. Let the stone interpret. Let the flux shift. Let the next phase begin without his hand. He slept once every 2 days, ate sparingly, drank clean water only from fountains marked with his earliest symbols. His body didn't reject the strain. It adapted. His senses grew sharper. He began noticing time differently. A bell sounded longer than it should. The echo of footsteps revealed more than presence. They told him where someone was going next. He whispered a name once, his own, into a locked chamber with no witnesses. The spiral carved itself onto the door behind him. He did not smile. He did not fear. He wrote down the shape of the next city, not its name, its cracks, and in the spaces between its letters, he saw how it would need. The next city was Caldera, and Carthian didn't walk into it alone. He arrived as part of a caravan escort, disguised as a mid-tier scribe named Elren Garth, traveling with a modest shipment of salt glass and wine, meant for the upper stewards of House Harrow. The false name matched forged records, complete with licensing documents embedded with low-level flux patterns designed to fool checkpoint mirrors but collapse if studied too closely. He didn't expect anyone to check. Caldera wasn't like Bastes or Velmore. It was cleaner, newer, more suspicious, in all the wrong ways. The guards at the gate checked names and faces, not intentions. They didn't look for threat, they looked for disorder. Carthian gave them none. The other travelers didn't speak to him. That suited him. He listened, observed, tracked the rhythm of the city before even setting foot in it. Caldera breathed differently. Efficient, tightly wound, high rhythm, low tolerance for chaos. It would take longer to fracture. That was fine. The slow cracks lasted the longest. The city was built in 3 levels, low, middle and high, each with its own gates, sigils and guards. The low was where trades were done and lives were sold. The middle held the laws, the churches, the performance of civility. The high was where names made demands and imagined the world below obeyed. Carthian lived in the low, near the southern granaries, above a shop that sold expired mana roots and recharged spellstones that flickered when held. He paid his rent with a single silver coin etched in a Bastus spiral, watched the shopkeeper blink when he saw it, then fold it quietly into a leather pouch without comment. The symbol traveled faster than he did. He spent the first week walking the city in long arcs, keeping pace with trade carts, mapping patrol patterns, noting every noble crest and every crestless structure. He didn't draw maps anymore, he composed them. Each intersection was a chord, each flow of foot traffic a measure, each flicker of magical enforcement a drumbeat. Caldera was tightly orchestrated, but not immune. It had too many hands on the strings that made it vulnerable to suggestion. He tested this by placing a single rune beneath a fountain in the central ring plaza. Nothing aggressive, just a resonance loop. Within days, the stone beneath the fountain began humming under pressure, creating a faint whine that no caster could isolate. The city responded by draining the fountain. The whine stopped. The rune had already passed its signal. Carthian found work under the name Alrin, in a ledger house that processed tax records for flux-bound trade. He copied manifests, corrected errors, logged inconsistencies. The pay was low, the exposure was priceless. Within days, he saw which houses over-reported and which underclaimed. He followed the paper until it bled into truth. He tracked names that didn't match the coins they stamped, and the ones who passed messages through typo-ridden receipt. One clerk in particular, a woman named Jessen, always recorded one entry in every 10 with a mismatched seal. Deliberate, trained. He followed her after work, found her delivering packets to a house that didn't exist on city registry. When she vanished a week later, he marked her last delivery point with a rune that folded itself into the wall. He didn't interfere, not yet. He wanted the city to digest the anomaly. He repeated the process with another target, a transport inspector named Vor, who skimmed taxes from alchemy shipments by rerouting verification tokens. Carthian didn't confront him. He simply adjusted the inspector's daily schedule through falsified assignments until Vor arrived at a checkpoint. The same hour, a smuggling operation ran a sweep. The smugglers disappeared. Vor disappeared with them. The sweep continued. The city's enforcement system didn't pause to consider why it had just eaten its own. That was his second test. Caldera passed. The spiral came next. He carved it into the iron drain behind the tax house, concealed in grime and rust. Not to be found, but to settle. The shape lingered, carried by boot print and rainwater, drawn into the cracks by memory. He marked no one. He left no demands, but people began reacting. Clerks arrived earlier, inspectors walked faster. The stone seemed colder in the morning. By the end of the second month, 6 minor officials had either transferred or disappeared. Carthian replaced none of them. Their absence rewrote more than their actions ever had. He expanded laterally, sending signals to Velmore and Vastus by coded drops and flux ticks embedded in cargo shipment. The spiral was alive there, sustaining itself. He didn't need to lead anymore. He let the image do the work. Each city folded into silence at its own pace, and from that silence, obedience bloomed. He began referring to his growing presence not as a faction but as a condition, an illness, a pressure, a necessity. He whispered it once in the halls of a forgotten chapel, and let the stone remember. In Caldera's lower ring, he established 4 pressure points. 2 in merchant guilds, 1 in a customs office, 1 in a cursed library. Each acted as a buffer node, absorbing and echoing minor flux disturbances. No spells, just awareness. He moved information through them like nerves, never enough to trigger suspicion, but enough to ensure no step he took landed without purpose. He brought no one with him from Velmore, no Hartiel, no Vesha. He started fresh. That was necessary. Cities needed to form their own shape around him. He recruited a boy named Teth, who stole without looking over his shoulder. He taught the boy to listen for tone changes, not threats. The boy didn't ask questions. That made him useful. Then he found a broken mage, one who had lost her voice to a failed ritual and survived with nothing but hands that still pulsed with flux, but couldn't release it. Her name was Rin. He taught her how to inscribe runes using resonance loops and internal pressure. She said nothing, only what learned. Drew. Within a month, her spirals were better than his. They met weekly, never in the same place twice. Carthian didn't build loyalty. He built rhythm. Trust could be betrayed. Rhythm persisted. He weakened House Harrow by correcting their supply records too efficient. By adjusting their audits, he brought attention. Attention brought inspectors. Inspectors brought fear. Their servants began leaving. Their investments slowed. Their name dimmed. He said nothing. The city whispered for him. By the 4th month, the spiral had appeared in 2 places without his hand. One on the shoulder of a mercenary's corpse, carved post-mortem, the other in a ledger signed by a dead man. Carthian watched the city react. No outrage, just alertness. The spiral didn't shock anymore. It reminded. That was the 3rd test. He passed it by vanishing. Elrin Garth stopped reporting to work. His room above the root shop emptied. The shopkeeper said he'd paid for 3 months. His belongings remained untouched. His trace vanished, but the spiral did not. And beneath the city, in a chamber carved from rock too old to have been shaped by modern hands, Carthian inscribed the next rune. Not for motion, not for perception, for return. A way to leave fragments of himself in spaces that mattered, so that every time someone entered the room with the wrong intention, the spiral would adjust the air, tilt the balance, correct the outcome. He didn't want people to fear him. He wanted the world to obey him without knowing why. Caldera never cracked loudly, it bent. Subtly, he watched noble alliances shift without war, watched house banners dip without burnings. And when the 4th city whispered its own name in a dream he didn't recognize, he stood, brushed the ash from his coat, and started walking. The world was ready. Now it would kneel. The 4th city called itself Malentis, but the traders who passed through it used simpler names. The Hollow Gate, the Taker's Wharf, Blackvein Crop. It sat where 5 major routes collided, built around an ancient mining shaft that now served as the deepest vault district in the western half of the continent. It was dense, vertical, and layered in rot, so refined that it smelled like incense. There were no palaces, no grand spire. Malentis dressed its nobility in soot and silver, hid its wealth in blood-tracked ledgers, and passed its authority through ritualized debt. Carthian did not enter the city as a noble, nor a worker, nor a traveling scholar. He entered as a corpse, pulled in by a caravan of slag haulers returning from a failed ore run, wrapped in funeral gauze saturated with cold root extract to still his breath and lower his pulse. The man who smuggled him in had no name, only one missing eye, and a brand of a broken chain across his neck. When they reached the gates, the corpse was dropped with the others in the pit outside the quarantine yard. By dusk, the pit was burned. Carthian was not in. He was already beneath the city, walking through dust-filled caverns, where the air tasted like rust and the walls whispered of old things not buried deep enough. Malentis wasn't a city to be infiltrated. It was a city to be absorbed into, crawled through, mimicked, worn like damp clothes, until you understood what stank and what kept you warm. Carthian started with Silent. He lived in the abandoned bottom floor of a collapsed counting house, walls half melted from a flux fire incident 3 years prior, still pulsing with dull magic that made most people's teeth hurt. It kept them out. He carved no symbols, drew no spiral. For 5 weeks he moved without leaving marks, letting the city show him how it breathed. Malentis pulsed with transaction. Everything was a deal. Airspace, shadow, rest, sleep, permission to walk a certain alley. Every step had a price, spoken or not. The real power lay in those who remembered debts. Names were written on stone, then paid off by coin, blood or silence. No debt was ever forgotten, only transferred. He began by erasing one. A boy named Jex, branded for life after stealing a flux charm from a dock merchant, was hunted by a local faction called the Low Vow. Carthian gave Jex his coin mark, 3 flat bits of burnished steel fused with pressure, and etched with the crest of an extinct noble house. Jex was caught by the Vow 2 days later. When they stripped him, found the coin mark, and recognized the house symbol, they hesitated. The Vow had once served House Elfin. The mark wasn't valuable, but it meant history. They let the boy go, not out of mercy, out of protocol. Jex never saw Carthian again. That was fine. That moment had seeded the spiral in Malentis. Carthian found the money not by robbing vaults, but by guessing future trades. He spent a week listening to dock pricing calls, flux auctions and ash metal shipment. He predicted a price surge in reclaimed bone glass and bought low, using stolen seals. When the surge hit, he traded it not for gold, but for names. Names of debt keepers, deal holders, silent brokers, names whispered too softly for most men to record. He built a ledger of shadows and started writing patterns beside them. Who owed who? Who could be bought? Who could be bent? He approached no one, but his presence spread. He walked into an ash house on the 8th level where broken contracts were burned for ritual closure. He tossed in a contract that wasn't his, one he found folded in an alley, already signed, already failed. The clerk paused when the flames turned blue. That meant intent had been rewritten. The next morning, his mark was on the ash house wall, small, spiral, not carved, not painted, formed in soot as if the fire itself had remembered. He formed his inner circle in Malentis by watching people who broke the rules not out of greed, but precision. A woman who ran her own toll route by walking the same path every night, tapping the ground 3 times with a bone flute to signal invisible guards to step aside. A veteran who placed stones at exact angles along tunnel walls, so their shadows revealed which direction flux was flowing. A mute trader who bartered in teeth instead of coin and could tell which were real, stolen, cursed or gilded. Carthian watched, left messages through patterns they could see, and when they responded with shifts, altered angles, duplicated taps, missing teeth, he knew they understood. He made no oaths. He gave no orders. He left boxes. Inside them, instructions written not in letters but in combinations: stone, water, blood, light. If they followed, they passed. If not, they vanished. None ever returned to ask questions. The spiral had begun to build itself. He used their knowledge to manipulate a key node, one of the vertical cargo lifts that moved goods from the vault levels up to the trade ring. He didn't disable it, he altered its rhythm. By timing the delay of each platform shift and corrupting the reporting schedule, he forced merchants to reorganize their stock cycles. 3 houses blamed each other, 2 guards were reassigned, 1 broker was killed. Carthian marked the lift's pulley housing with a spiral drawn in oil soot and hidden beneath a spell-proof shield. By the 3rd month, no one mentioned his name, but one faction called themselves the Echo of Iron. They drew the spiral not on walls but in contracts. Bottom corners, silent, final. It became a symbol of expectation. People receiving the mark paid on time, asked no questions, spread the rhythm. He created a second presence for himself, not a fake identity, but a fiction given flesh. He called it the Stranger. Word spread that someone walked the deepest corridors of the Black Vault, never seen twice, never taking, only adjusting, locks found open that had been sealed, vaults found fuller than recorded, debts paid that no one remembered agreeing to. The Stranger became a ghost of precision, a rumor with rules. Carthian never confirmed it. He simply let people fear being noticed. Then he targeted the contract archives. Not to steal but to he slipped forged agreements into the backup shelves. Contracts that claimed old pacts between factions and dead houses, most favoring a non-existent beneficiary named Corral Age. The documents were perfect. Dates matched. Seals were correct. The spiral appeared as a watermark visible only under flux light. The clerks began investigating, found nothing, but they started treating Aish as if he might be real. By week's end, 4 different debt holders listed Aish as a silent partner in their ledger. Carthian burned the name a week later, sent a single page to each faction that had acknowledged it, stating simply, "This debt is closed. Remember the rhythm." No one challenged it. The ledger balances adjusted. He had become more than a man. He was now a precedent, and precedents rule city. He drew no blood in Molentis. The city drew it for him. He allowed conflict to rise, then folded it into policy. One faction war became a trade rule. One assassination turned into a shifting of escort privileges. No one rose in power without believing they had the spiral's blessing. Carthian only reinforced that belief by being absent. When he appeared, it was always too briefly, too quietly, too perfectly placed. He began carving the final rune of the city into the framework of the central lift, embedding a pattern of resonance into the steel cables that would hum each time a shipment passed. It wouldn't change direction, it would change belief. Every merchant who heard it would begin associating the rhythm with fulfillment, with wealth, with success. The spiral would hum them into loyalty. He wrote the words of the next city into his journal, sealed it with a rune of forgetting, and placed it in the archive vault of the Ashbone Library, where no one could read it without first sacrificing a name. Then he left Molentis. Not through the gates, not on a carab. He walked into the lowest vault, etched the rune of passage into the wall, stepped through the opening that was not a door, and vanished. His cities were not conquered, they were redefined. The world would follow, not because it was told, because it no longer remembered how to say no. He emerged beneath a sky he didn't recognize. Air dry, heavy with the scent of sulfur and bone moss, the kind of place where nothing grew by accident. The city ahead was called Narath, though its name changed depending on which faction whispered it. The surface called it the Ember Crown, after the red glass spires jutting up along the ridgelines like scorched thorns. Old maps labeled it as Narath-ul-Kahar, a dual city once ruled by 2 competing houses of bloodcasters, who warred until both were dust. Now, it was a city of secrets, the deepest trade point for materials too dangerous to catalog, and too valuable to destroy. Runes here weren't dismissed or denied, they were feared, sold, and buried. That suited Carthian more than anything. He didn't walk in as a thief or a goat. He walked in as a buyer, no mask, no pretense. Just a satchel of charred contracts and a face no one would dare remember. The gatekeeper wasn't a man. It was a flux-bound creature, stitched from 3 corpses, breathing through slits in its neck. Eyes like dried fruit and a voice that echoed before it arrived. Carthian handed it a token taken from Molentis, inscribed with the rune of accepted deception. The creature examined it, nodded once, and opened a path not by turning a gate, but by stepping aside. That was the first sign. Narath didn't guard its doors with strength. It guarded them with implication. The streets were narrower than Velmor, taller than Vastus, darker than Molentis. Every structure had multiple entrances, each ranked by the risk of entry. Upper doors were legal, middle ones were priced in favors, bottom doors were paid for in scars. He walked through the lowest, left a trace of bone ash on the handle, and passed into the city's shadow without a second glance. His first contact was a woman named Thing, skin wrapped in inscription tattoos that writhed when she breathed. She sold maps, not on parchment, but through touch. Each buyer received a jolt of direction directly into the nerves, temporary, disorienting, but perfect. He let her burn one into his spine. She hissed when she touched him. "You've already been written," he nodded. Paid her in silence. She didn't ask again. Narath wasn't built like other cities. It pulsed in spirals. Roads coiled back on themselves. Signs pointed nowhere. Light was rash. Sounds bent between buildings like echoes with opinions. He found his quarters in a collapsed kiln, reinforced with silence wards and buried contracts. He did not decorate, he did not sleep. He began drawing lines, not runes, not yet, just motion pattern. He tracked where traders moved, where guards avoided, where whispers settled. The city's most trafficked spot wasn't a market or a hall, but a dead wall 3 levels beneath the main staircases. No one stopped there, everyone passed. That meant belief had been planted there long ago, buried in routine. He placed his first rune just beneath the wall's lowest stone. It didn't shine. It didn't pulse. It just remained. Narath required a new rhythm. The previous cities could be nudged through fear and suggestion. This one thrived on threat, so he created one. A body, faceless, found in a sealed vault with a note that read, "The Spiral Watches." There was no symbol, no mark, but those words spread. The city already knew of spirals. Here, they were linked to punishment, curses, blood oaths. Carthian turned that association. In 4 days the phrase began to mean something else. Not threat, balance. He met with the Silted Tongue, an information syndicate that traded only in death records and hidden names. He gave them a list of nobles who had died in Belmore. The records were sealed, unprovable. That made them valuable. They traded him in kind. A book of black sigils, each representing a pact broken in Narath's last era. Carthian memorized them, then burned the pages one by one, feeding the ashes into the city's deep wells. The runes didn't vanish, they sank. He built his circle with no names. 7 people, each drawn from broken ties and discarded lines of influence. A beast handler who refused to speak above a whisper. A swordmaster who'd killed his own guildmaster for lies. A stone witch who carved forbidden runes into the back of her tongue. 3 others whose lives had been erased by accident, and one who simply followed the rhythm without asking why. He trained them not to fight, but to sustain. Their jobs were to be present, never obvious. To walk patterns, to recite phrases, to exist where memory pulled, and let the spiral sink deeper into the world's subconscious. Then he began testing the city's resistance. He sabotaged a trade pact between 2 guilds not by altering documents, but by replacing a single escort. That man vanished. The shipment arrived late. Blame passed. Trust collapsed. A war almost began. He ended it with a single message. Balance is not an accident. The war never happened, but the memory of it did. He carved a rune into the ceiling of an old transit tunnel beneath the 3rd ring. This one reversed the direction of sound. When a person walked beneath it, their footsteps arrived behind them instead of ahead. It drove 2 pursuers mad. 3 merchants altered their routes. A high enforcer died from a misstep. No one traced it to him. No one knew how, but they started avoiding the tunnel. That area became his domain. He buried a cipher in the trade chants sung during dawnlight opening rituals. Just 4 syllables altered in the 3rd line. Priests sang it unaware. But over time, the shape of the chant began to mirror the spiral's cadence. Carthian never confirmed it. He never had to. The city was being rewritten by muscle memory. When word of a new power reached the upper chambers, whispers of a balance broker, a silent adjudicator who fixed debts not with threats, but with canishing. He released the ledger, blank, except for one phrase: "What you owe is what you've stolen from your future." It passed through 8 hands before a noble bled himself dry to settle a debt he hadn't been accused of yet. Carthian's name never appeared, but the spiral was spoken in hushed tones as a correction, not a symbol. That was the turning point. Narath adapted slower, but when it adapted, it didn't revert. It devoured. He let it devour him. He spent 3 days in silence beneath the old mining spires, breathing only when the air allowed it. When he emerged, he carved the final rune of Narath into the teeth of a dead judge. He planted the jawbone in the vaults of the Silted Tongue, where it would be found only when needed. The city would not thank him, but it would remember. He left Narath not through tunnels, not by foot, but by stepping into a mirror that wasn't a mirror, carved from black stone that never reflected. The rune of passage pulsed only once. He entered a forest with no sky. He heard the next city whisper his name before he knew its shape. The spiral followed. The world kept turning, but now it turned to face him. The forest was not marked on any map. Its trees were too straight, its roots too shallow, its canopy thick enough to blot out the sun, though no clouds passed above. Every step Carthian took left no trace behind him, the ground refusing to remember his weight, the air refusing to carry his scent. It was not a forest in the way men understood forest. It was a space between truths, a hollow stretch of unspoken history, where cities were not yet born, and old empires had come to die. He did not question why the passage rune brought him here. He walked until the trees shifted from wood to bone, until the underbrush became flat stone etched in half-erased writing. Then he found the city. It had no name, no gates, no guards. It sat in silence. Its walls formed from glass black brick and mineral veins that pulsed only when they were not being watched. Carthian did not knock. He walked through a threshold that was not an entrance, crossing into a place where language recoiled and logic hesitated. This was not a city men built. It was a city that had always been waiting. The first spiral was carved into the wall beside the path, inverted, half buried in lichen that shimmered like frost. He felt no wind, no sound, only the pressure of presence, the undeniable pull of a place that recognized him not by face or name, but by intention. He descended into its core, no signs, no people, just levels upon levels of structure. Each floor held remnants, rooms filled with ash piles and empty thrones. Corridors that bent in on themselves, doors that opened onto stone walls and closed onto staircases that no longer led anywhere. He passed through them with patience. The spiral carved into his back itched once. He did not scratch. At the city's heart he found the Hall of Witness. It was not called that. There were no names carved, no banners hung, but Carthian knew it. He had seen it in dreams not his own, in memories drawn from bones he had not broken. The hall had 12 pillars, each formed from fused remains of forgotten magic wands, staffs, broken cores, sigil-scratched armor, melted into shape. In the center was a pool of black liquid. It did not ripple, it absorbed sound. Carthian stood at its edge and stared at his reflection. He had not aged, his coat was clean. The runes beneath his skin glowed faintly, as if recognizing the pool. He knelt, whispered, not in a language he remembered, but one the runes spoke through him. The liquid shifted. He saw his cities, Bastis, afraid of its own shadow. Belmore, pretending to rule while obeying rhythm. Caldera, steady and silent, waiting for permission to think. Molentus, crouched and feral, bearing its spiral like a brand it could not remove. Narath, remembering the rules it had once forgotten, now breathing in spiral-shaped stens. They were all still turning, not screaming, not collapsing, becoming. Carthian reached into the pool. It did not hurt. It pulled. The liquid crawled up his arm, into the spaces between runes, into the shapes drawn beneath his ribs. It did not possess. It affirmed. He stood, arm black to the shoulder, and the pool receded, vanishing into stone as if it had never existed. On the wall behind the pillars a door appeared. He stepped through. It led not forward but across. He walked into a chamber made of thought, a room formed from remembered choices and unfinished ambitions. Across the walls were etched every decision he had made since he found the first spiral, not in words, but in shape, pressure, pulp, the echoes of his will inscribed in stone that remembered more than sound. He saw the mark he left on Bastis, the first rune carved by reflex. He saw Vilmore's shift, the tremor that moved its silence. Caldera's restraint, the way it tried not to flinch. Molentus's hunger, how it fed on itself and made space for him. Nerith's whisper, long and deep, now folded into itself like a book that only opened when forgotten. He stood in silence, and let the room breathe. Then he turned to the final wall. It was blank, not empty, blank, waiting. The spiral behind his eye burned, not in pain, in recognition. This was not the next city, this was the space that would give it permission to exist. He stepped forward, raised a hand, and etched the beginning of a spiral. Not a symbol, not a spell, a promise. The wall absorbed the line, then the second, then the third, and when he finished, the room closed. He was standing in a new place. Not forest, not ruin, not the city of memory. A real city, one that had never been named, because it had not been needed until now. He stepped onto a street of black stone. Buildings rose around him. Empty, perfect, clean. Every door unlocked, every window open. No people, no sound, but the infrastructure was complete. Markets stocked, lamps lit, rooms furnished. It had not been abandoned. It had never been lived in. He walked to the center, stood beneath a tower that reached up into a sky of moving ash and drifting lights, and looked up. There was a spiral carved into the sky. He did not remember putting it there. He didn't need to. The city had remembered for him. He sat on the steps, waited. Time did not move. The spiral pulsed once, and far away, in Caldera, a merchant dropped a cup. In Belmore, a child forgot her mother's name. In Bastis, a noble who had never met him signed away land to a faceless trust. In Narath, a street was renamed after a man no one could prove existed. In Molentus, a contract was fulfilled before it had been written. The city turned, and Carthian smiled. He had not won. He had not conquered. He had rewritten the rules. The next city would not be claimed. It would be called, and when it answered, the world would no longer know what had changed. Only that it had, and that it had happened in silence, with a single spiral, drawn in the shape of understanding. He did not stay in the city that remembered him. It had no name to speak, no people to govern, no enemies to sharpen the blade of progress. It was the shape of culmination, a reflection of all he'd bent and carved, and so it could serve only as a mirror, not a throne. Carthian left it on foot, walking down a spiral ramp that had not existed until he stepped toward it, and emerged into the southern edge of a kingdom that had once claimed dominance over 5 provinces, but now barely held 2. Its capital, Al-Barad, stood in the center of a fractured land, too proud to admit its decline, too stubborn to modernize. It bore the marks of nobility without relevance. Silver-lined roads that led nowhere, broken statues of monarchs no one named anymore, and an exhausted guard force more concerned with ceremony than combat. But the walls still stood, the towers still flew banners, and the archives still held their ancient oaths, which meant it could be used, not ruled. not owned. Alive. Carthian entered Albarad beneath the false identity of a high-end security consultant, a common enough profession in a city that feared political upheaval but didn't understand it. The papers were forged through a three-stage resonance signature, mimicking court approval from 2 neighboring cities and 1 exiled noble house. The guards barely glanced at them. His name was Dalveth, his cover impeccable. He wore a cloak trimmed in faded red, a color associated with the fallen border lords, the kind that inspired deference and discomfort but no real curiosity. The spiral was nowhere on him. That was the lesson from Narath. Power must arrive after recognition, not before. He took a room in the highest floor of a reconditioned observatory turned lodging hall, a place with few guests and fewer questions. From the roof he mapped the city in rotations, watch points, call changes, courier routes. Albarad ran with the precision of habit, not strategy. It relied on predictability as a substitute for control. Carthian didn't need to break that. He only needed to nudge it, so he began. He arranged a transfer order for a captain of the city watch, not a high-ranking one, a border captain, responsible for overseeing one of the 6 main access roads. The order bore the signature of a counselor, who had retired 6 years ago, embedded in ink, coded to pass detection, but disintegrate after 72 hours. The transfer went through. The replacement arrived. 3 patrols were delayed, 2 left unmonitored, and 1 caravan carrying forged documents passed through unchecked. No alarms, no suspicions, but that small unnoticed alteration allowed Carthian's next step. He slipped a message into the vault delivery that same caravan carried. An unsealed page bearing only a spiral drawn in silver dust and the phrase "correction begins where certainty dies." It took 4 days before the first reaction reached him. A council scribe named Jarn requested a private audience with Dalveth. They met in the 3rd hour of the night, in a candlelit hall beneath a dome inscribed with the names of the city's founders. Jarn asked no question. He placed the silver-dusted spiral on the table between them, said nothing, and waited. Carthian looked at the mark and said, "There is no answer, only resonance." Jarn blinked, sat back and nodded. When he left, he took the spiral with. The next day, 3 merchants were arrested for failing to register their trade carts. All 3 were loyal to rival cities. Their ledgers were burned, their contracts voided. No one traced it back to Jarn. Carthian didn't follow up. He didn't need to. Jarn had passed the test, initiative without instruction. Those were the only kinds of subordinates worth cultivating. He continued his work silently, moved through the markets not as a power, but as a presence. He did not announce, he listened. Every whisper, every hesitation, every deviation in the expected tone of a transaction was a signal. He placed a rune of friction beneath the main tax office, designed not to cause pain but subtle discomfort when dishonest currency passed over it. The clerks began shifting their seat. The magistrate shortened sessions. The coin counters hesitated. He followed that with a secondary rune, etched into the temple bell, timed so that its resonance created a half-second echo only the deeply faithful would notice. 2 priests altered their sermon. One changed his public stance on the neutrality of divine law. He recruited 3 people without speaking to them. A mason who'd been fired for cutting windows out of alignment, a cook who never served the same meal twice and refused to explain why, and a mute weaver whose thread colors changed based on what time of day her customers arrived. Carthian left them each a task. The mason received a set of blueprints with no buildings labeled, just weight distributions. The cook received a spice blend coated in scent patterns that caused mild hallucinations if mixed improperly. The weaver received thread dyed in ink that revealed its pattern only when woven into exact geometric shapes. They all responded. The mason sent back a corrected version of the city's central aqueduct, rerouted to flow 3 seconds slower at peak usage, disrupting water schedules by just enough to force city engineers to reevaluate their blueprints. The cook began serving a dish that caused sharp memories of untraceable origin in diners. None unpleasant, all vivid. The weaver sold a tapestry that changed alignment when viewed from different angles, revealing the spiral only when passed at dusk from the east side. Albarad began to shift. Its nobles whispered of unease, not from threat but from misalignment. Their words no longer landed the same. Their orders were carried out slightly slower, their doors closed with different weight. They suspected nothing. Suspecting meant acknowledging cause. Carthian offered none. He sent letters to Bastus, Valmor, Caldera, Molentus, Narath, each sealed with the same phrase, "Alignment has begun." He did not expect answers, but he received 5. Not replies, events. In Bastus, a council was overturned by public refusal to obey. In Valmor, a key contract was fulfilled in reverse. Profits returned before delivery. In Caldera, an official committed suicide over debts that didn't exist. In Molintus, a noble house erased its own sigil from every property it owned. In Narath, a child born during a thunderstorm was named Spiral and granted land. The signal was clear. He moved to the final phase. He entered the archives beneath the Hall of Oaths, where every recorded law since the city's founding was stored in a library, accessible only through blood-bonded locks. He did not breach it. He altered its ritual. The blood required for entry needed lineage. He changed that to memory. A small shift. A new rune, hidden beneath the ritual table. Now, only those who remembered what the city had once been, not who they descended from, could enter. The lock changed. None noticed. He entered 3 nights later and placed a blank scroll inside the oldest shelf. It bore no spiral, no words, just silence. The city's memory absorbed it. Within a week, 3 laws were reinterpreted by judges as if they had always read differently. No challenge was made. No protest was filed. The laws fit better now. That was enough. Carthian left the observatory that night and walked into the main square, standing beneath the stone statue of the first king of Albarad. He raised no voice, drew no blade, simply looked at the face carved into arrogance and said, "Your city has been corrected." The spiral did not appear. It was already there, drawn into the shadow of the statue's outstretched hand, visible only at sunset when the angle aligned. The city knelt, quietly, without blood, without oath, because it had already decided it wanted to follow. He turned, walked. The road bent ahead of him, and the next city whispered from beyond the curve, waiting, wanting, ready to become something better than it remembered being. The 11th city had no central governance, no royal bloodlines, no established church. It had no walls, no open ports, no high towers from which nobles could peer down with ceremonial contempt. It was not born of conquest or noble decree. It had grown like a fungus over time, spreading from a shattered fort that once housed soldiers forgotten by every kingdom they served. What remained now was called Relvar, though no one knew what the word once meant. The name stuck because it was short, easy to scrawl in blood or chalk, and did not belong to anyone else. It had survived for decades through tension, different factions pulling at its bones, carving out corners to control. There were no laws, only pacts, no police, only enforcers, no truth, only debt. And yet Relvar functioned. People lived, traded, betrayed and rebuilt. Carthian didn't see chaos. He saw material. He entered Relvar unmarked, dressed in a patchwork coat layered in dust and rust-colored stitching that whispered familiarity to the city's broken. No identity was needed. No questions were asked. He crossed 3 gang borders in a single day, nodded to no one and wasn't stopped. He carried a satchel with no straps, waited to hang as if empty. Inside were 6 stones, each carved with incomplete runes. Each one offered dissonance, a change in perception, a warp in routine. He placed them in specific points as he moved. Beneath the frame of a butcher's stall, whose owner skimped on salt, under a broken altar used for flux swearing, inside a wall crack where old blood still darkened the stone. The runes did not activate. They settled, like seeds planted in soil that needed time to remember how to grow. The city reacted slowly, not with screams, but with hesitations. The butcher's customers began asking fewer questions, accepting poorer cuts, forgetting what they came for. The altar stopped responding to oaths. The crack in the wall shifted ever so slightly when viewed from certain angles, as if refusing to accept the same story twice. That was Carthian's intent, not to provoke, but to loosen. Relvar didn't need shock. It needed confusion. A city built on tension would tear itself apart only when the threads tying its chaos together began to fray. He found a place to sleep in a roofless structure once used as a mortuary. The beds were long gone. The fire pits had been turned into pits for boiling dye. The walls had no graffiti. That was why he chose it. He etched the first spiral at the base of the eastern column, using ash mixed with animal glue. A simple spiral, unlit, invisible unless touched. By morning, it was gone, not erased, not destroyed, absorbed. The stone knew it now. That was enough. He spent his days wandering. He did not interact. He appeared. That was enough. Men who lived in Relvar knew how to see a problem long before it spoke. They watched him. They noticed the coat, the way he never flinched at sudden movement, the way people unconsciously stepped aside as he passed. He didn't carry weapons. He didn't need to. His presence was the edge. Rumors started within a week. Some said he was from the old mines. Others claimed he'd come from the broken steppe, that he was the son of a ruined archmage who cursed every city he entered. The spiral never came up. That was deliberate. Relvar wouldn't respect a symbol until it tasted what the symbol meant. So Carthian gave it a taste. He altered one faction's supply chain, not by stealing, not by destroying, but by replacing. 2 crates of healing tinctures were swapped with a nearly identical blend designed to reverse flux adaptations. No deaths occurred, but the affected gang began losing duels. Their enforcers fell sick. Their mages began failing to catch. The faction, known as the Black Buckle, accused their supplier of sabotage. That sparked a fight. Another faction, the Red Salts, claimed innocence. The Buckles attacked. 5 days of bloodshed followed, during which Carthian did nothing. The spiral was not but when the conflict ended and the Buckles lost their district, one wall bore a curve, just a piece of a spiral. Enough to ask a question. The answer arrived within hours. The leader of the Red Salts, a woman named Helra, sent a runner. The runner didn't find Carthian. That didn't matter. The message was placed in the pit of the mortuary turned shelter. Inside, a coin split in half and burned along the edge, a symbol of recognition among Relvar's older gangs. Carthian accepted. He carved a full spiral beneath the stone where the coin had rested. By morning, the smell of flux in that part of the city shifted, brighter, sharper. Helra gave no orders to her men, but they started drawing tighter formations. Their speech changed. The spiral hadn't given them power. It had given them permission. The next phase required a larger adjustment. Carthian didn't want a faction war. He wanted a silence wide enough for redefinition. He selected 3 targets: the trade broker, who managed the road markets, a smuggler who controlled the river docks, and a scavenger baron who hoarded broken spellbooks and sold fake pages for real favors. Each was influential, but not dominant. Each had survived because they understood the line between visibility and relevance. Carthian approached none of them. He sent them packages, small boxes containing folded parchment, soaked in sleep ink, each inscribed with a single curve. When opened, the parchment emitted a sound only audible in memory. It reminded them of something they had forgotten: fear, not of death, but of being rewritten. Within 3 days the broker fled. The smuggler burned his own operation and vanished. The scavenger baron sent a messenger offering a library. Carthian refused. The messenger found the spiral carved into his shadow. The next day, and he too disappeared. With those figures gone, the factions began shifting. Confused, power couldn't balance itself. New hands tried to fill the space. Carthian moved again. He visited the upper ruin pits where the oldest bones were dumped, not buried, just stacked. A necromancer had tried to raise them once, and had been torn apart for her trouble. The place was avoided now. That made it hit. He drew the new rune in the earth. Broad, slow, steady. This one wasn't about alteration. It was about continuity. A loop that sustained itself, feeding on decision and doubt. When people began to see him, really see him, they stopped seeing a man. They saw a silhouette that never walked the same path twice, who never looked anyone in the eyes but always made them feel watched. He didn't need to command. His existence commanded. Factions began drawing spirals into their own marks. Not fully, just curved enough to invite interpretation. Stories spread. The man was a judge, an exile, a beast cursed into human shape. The spiral became an excuse, then a threat, then a right. One gang, the Bone Knots, declared themselves servants of the spiral law. They stopped raiding, began mediating dispute. Their leader, once known for drowning enemies in boiled salt, now sat in silence while people argued, only nodding when they were finished. He carried no weapon, wore a cloak with a single stitched curve. That was enough. Carthian visited the Bone Knot leader once, said nothing, placed a spiral coin on the table, left. The man did not follow. He didn't need to. He already belonged. When the city finally whispered Carthian's presence to itself, it did so without naming him. People spoke of balance, of silence, of shape. Streets gained new names without announcement. Corners turned inward. Whole blocks changed their rhythm. Conflict didn't stop, but it shifted. It became ritualized, ruled by rhythm. He drew the final spiral into the side of the ruined bell tower at the city's edge. He used no tool, only touch. The stone accepted it. When the wind passed over the tower, the bell rang again for the first time in a decade. No one knew why. No one dared climb to see. Carthian did not leave Relvar with ceremony. He stepped into an alley that should have led to nowhere and found himself walking down a corridor made of breath and pressure and memory. He didn't question it. The next city was already forming. He would not wait for it. He would finish the spiral he had started at the beginning, one city at a time, until the world didn't know how to think in straight lines anymore.